Hi there, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is a new read aloud segment because we finished our first read aloud. I actually had my students write in and tell me which book they think I should read, and it was really close tie between two of them, and the one that won is I Survived Mount St. Helens 1980. So I'm going to read this one first and then I'll get to some of the other books later. So the reason why I wanted to read this book is because Mount St. Helens is actually a mountain in Washington State, which is where I'm from, that erupted way before I was born, but I've heard a lot about the story, so it'd be really interesting. So what it says on the back, I will read to you. It says, the mountain exploded with the power of 10 million tons of dynamite. 11-year-old Jessie Marlowe has grown up with this beautiful Mount St. Helens always in the background. She's hiked its winding trails, dived into cold lakes, and fished for trout in the streams. Just looking at Mount St. Helens out her window made Jess feel calm, like it was watching over her somehow. Of course, she knew the mountain was a volcano, but not the active kind, not a volcano that can destroy and kill. Then Mount St. Helens exploded with unimaginable fury. Jess suddenly finds herself in the middle of the deadliest and most destructive volcanic events in U.S. history. Ash and rock are spewing everywhere. Can Jess escape in time? So that's what the back says. That's a synopsis. Basically what it does is it tries to grab the reader in and say, hey, I think you should read this book. I'm already intrigued. So this is a realistic fiction story. So a realistic fiction story means that it takes place in a historic event, but the story itself is not true. Like Jessie Marlowe, this is not a true story about her, but it could have happened because it's happening when the Mount St. Helens erupted. So if you like history, I definitely recommend these books. They're awesome, all about historical events, just fiction, so just stories made up. So when you turn the page, you get to a dedication. So what a dedication does is the author will dedicate writing this book, meaning they'll say thank you or kind of say who this book is for. Usually it's a lot of family members and relatives, children or parents or things like that. This one says, for you girls, which I thought was a really sweet dedication. And I think that's awesome. It's for boys too. It's for boys and girls, obviously. Chapter 1. Actually, let's show you this picture. Very first picture. That is a volcano erupting. What volcano is it? Mount St. Helens, exactly. Okay, Sunday, May 18th, 1980, 8:32 a.m., Mount St. Helens, Washington State. So that gives kind of a cool date and time that is happening. For more than 100 years, Mount St. Helens had been quiet, a beautiful mountain surrounded by forests. Hikers climbed its winding trails, skiers raced down its snowy slopes, children splashed in the crystal clear lakes. Except this peaceful mountain was not a mountain. It was a dangerous volcano, a deadly cone filled with molten rock and poisonous gas. And soon it would explode with the power of 10 million tons of dynamite. In the minutes before the eruption, 11-year-old Jessie Marlowe and her best friends, Eddie and Sam, were in a forest near St. Helens. The day was warm and bright, and the sky brilliant blue. St. Helens rose up over them in a perfect triangle, peak sparkling with snow, and then kaboom! Suddenly, Jessie was in the middle of the deadliest volcano eruption in American history. She watched in horror as the sky pitched black. A blizzard of ash poured down, swirling up her nose and making it almost impossible to breathe. Hot rocks pelted her like bullets shooting from the sky. Then, whoosh! A blast of wind exploded out of the mountain, a white-hot mix of ash and gas and shards of rock. It raced down the mountain at jet speeds, turning everything in its path. The heat hit Jess and the boys, knocking them down. Jess felt as though she would burst into flames. Every breath was like inhaling fire, but the terror was just beginning. The eruption had shattered the mountain, and now a 50-mile-wide avalanche of rock and mud and melted ice was taking aim at the valley below. It grew larger by the second. It snatched up trees and boulders. It tore away bridges and swept away houses. It would destroy anything and everyone in its path. Okay, So that is the first chapter. So the first chapter is, oh, it's so interesting. The author really paints an interesting picture of what's going on, how dangerous this volcano is. So I want to kind of go into a little bit of history and kind of point out where this famous mountain is in Washington State. It is in my hometown, so it's going to be really fun. Let's get started and tune in for chapter 2 coming soon. All right, here we go. Here is a picture of the United States, and as you can see, Washington is the one in red. It is in the Pacific Northwest, so it's all the way over and up at the top of your screen to the left. All right, so here's kind of a more close-up of Washington State. As you can see, where it says kind of the greater Seattle area, that's around where I used to live. So that's kind of over by the water over there. And if you look down, 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 we'll get to kind of where our story takes place. So you see the red circle with the arrow pointing to it, that is pointing to the Mount St. Helens Regional Park. So the mountain is there, but there's also like a bunch of parks. And as we heard in our story, you know, there's hiking, there's skiing, things like that. So that's kind of the park area. So that's where Mount St. Helens is. Finally, here is our mountain. So it looks like a mountain. It doesn't actually look like what you think a typical volcano is, but there's the mountain. It's beautiful. It's got a lot of parks, and we'll kind of see what happens when it erupts. So finally, we kind of already saw a picture of it, but I thought I'd include it again. Here is one of the more famous photographs of when Mount St. Helens erupted. Anyway, so that is everything going on with Mount St. Helens. Thank you so much for listening to the story and watching the video on where it is in relation to Washington State. Tune in next time for chapter 2.